In this video tutorial, I'm going to have a look at how we can build a tkinter graphical user interface by inheriting from the tkinter frame class. Let's consider the runtime of this computer program. I'm going to come up here to where it says run, click on it, come down here and click on run module, or you can just press F5. This graphical user interface will appear, and you can see here we have a label, here we have an entry, here we have a button, and here we have a label, and you can see it's got a solid relief. Now what I can do here, I can come into this entry box and I can type in a name, which I will do. I'll type in my name, so I'll type in Philip Jones. When I do that, I'm going to come over here to where it says click me, and the graphical user interface is going to respond by saying hello Philip Jones. So you can see that hello Philip Jones appears in this label. Here you can see a screenshot of the computer program and the graphical user interface before I've entered anything into the graphical user interface. Let's now consider how the graphical user interface was created. The first thing to note is you can see that I've created a class called hello name frame, and if we look here we can see in brackets frame. Now that's telling us that the frame is the superclass and this is the subclass. Within the hello name frame class you can see that I have an initialization routine and also a method. The initialization routine is responsible for ensuring inheritance can take place, and it's also responsible for creating the various widgets and positioning them onto the frame, so then the frame can be loaded onto the window as shown here. The initialization routine also creates two tkinter string variables as shown by these two lines of code here. This is a method that belongs to the hello name frame class, and we arrange for this method to be executed when the user clicks on this button here. Let's consider a walk through the execution of this program. The first line to execute is this here, and you can see that we're creating a window, and that window I have referred to as my underscore window. Now this line creates an instance of the hello name frame class, and I'm referring to that instance by this name frame A. So frame A is going to be the name bound to the instance of the hello name frame class, and you can see here that we're passing in the window that was created on this line. When we create the instance of a class, as this line of code is doing, then we can look to the initialization routine within the class of which the instance is being created, and that's this initialization routine here. And we can see in brackets we have self and we have this other parameter called the window. Now when we create an instance, as we've seen here, we've covered many times in previous videos that each instance has a unique identifier, and that unique identifier is passed to this parameter here, self. Now this, my window, which is the instance of the window created on this line, is passed here to this parameter that I've named the underscore window. In order for this subclass to be able to inherit the attributes of this superclass, we need this line of code to be present within the initialization routine of the hello name frame class. If we look at this line, you can see that this is the name of the superclass that we wish to inherit from. And what we can see we have is dot notation, and it is telling us that we're going to be invoking the initialization routine of this superclass. And if we look in the brackets, we can see that we need to pass on self and the window. So the parameter that was passed to here is now passed to here, and the parameter that was passed to here is also passed on, as you can see, via this here. Now when this line has finished its execution, it has ensured that this class hello name frame will be able to inherit all the attributes of this superclass frame. This line of code effectively generates a variable that we can use, and the variable we can tie to specific widget in a graphical user interface. So when this line executes, I like to think of a variable being created, as you can see here, and this variable has this name, self.users_name, which is the name taken from here in the program. Consequently, if we have a look at this line, we can see that this is doing exactly the same thing, except of course we have a different name here. So schematically, I like to show that as another variable appearing. Now this variable has been created thanks to this string var. This one has also been created thanks to the string var. Now I recommend, if you're not quite sure what the string var actually does, you need to refer to another video on the YouTube channel, and I recommend that you search for the following named video. Let's consider this name here, which was taken from the program here. And if we have a close look at it, you can see that we have users_name forming part of the overall name. And this is because I wanted this variable to hold the name of whatever the user typed in. And in the example I ran earlier, I typed in my name, Philip Jones. And here you can see we've got dot notation taking place. And here you can see we have the word self. And that's the word self that was passed to here. So when the instance was created here, we had a unique identifier generated which was passed to this position. Consequently, when we see the self here, what we're saying is that this variable belongs to the instance that's being created. And because we can think of the hello name frame class as a factory capable of producing lots of objects, each of those objects will have their own copy of this, providing we put self in front of it, because the self identifies each of the variables to the instance to which it is going to belong, and that instance is identified by the ID passed here, and of course this then has access to that ID, as you can see here in the code. Of course, if we look at this variable name, we can see that we have self in front of it, so this too belongs to the same instance. To emphasize a point, we don't just have self in front of the names we choose, we also have to remember that we can see that there's a need to use dot notation. This is the next program statement to execute, and what it's going to do is to create an instance of the label widget, and this is responsible for creating that instance. And if you have a look at the parameters, you can see we're passing in self. Now that's needed so that the label being created knows it's associated with an instance of the hello name frame class. And here you can see we're setting the text to enter your name. And of course, the instance this creates is bound to this name here. And you can see that I chose the name friendly_label. And you can see there was again a need to put the self and the full stop in front of this name that I created. So this is the name of the label, and we can say that this is bound to this instance. Now later on in the code, this will execute, and we can see that this name here is the same as this one, so I'm referring to this instance, and you can see I'm invoking the grid method on this instance, and I'm positioning the label at row 0, column 0, and we can see that appears here, and that's row 0, column 0. Now this line of code creates an instance of the entry widget, and this line positions that instance. So we can see that we're positioning it at row 0, column 1, and that therefore means that the entry widget will appear here. This bit of code creates the instance of the entry widget, and if you look to the parameters, you can see that you're sending in self for the same reason that self was sent in here when we created the instance of the label. And if you look here, what you can see, we set the text variable of the entry widget to this variable here, which we've shown schematically here. So in other words, the instance of the entry widget that's created here is linked to this variable, and we can show that link in the following way. When the user of the program was to enter into here, as I did earlier, Philip Jones, then Philip Jones will automatically appear in this. So there's a direct link between this entry widget and this variable that was created on this line. Now this line of code will create an instance of the button class, an instance of the button widget, and that instance will be bound to this name. And if you come down here, you can see we have the same name and we're sending it a message, and that message invokes the grid method. And of course we can see this is row 1 column 0, so the button will appear here, which is row 1 column 0. Let's turn our attention back to this line of code where we create an instance of the button widget, and let's look to the parameters that we pass. And we can see that we pass in self for the same reasons that self was passed in before. And here you can see we set text to click me, and then click me you can see appears here within the button. And if you look at this parameter, we've got here command, and that has been assigned display output with the word self in front of it. Now I'll come back to why self is needed there in a moment, but if you look at this bit of the name, you can see that that's the name of this method here. In other words, what we've just done with this bit of the code is tied this button to this method. So when the user clicks on this button, this method here is executed. So why do we have this self dot here? Why can't we just simply have display underscore output to reference the method that's down here? Well, the answer is, if you look at this method, it is part of this class, and we create an instance of this class in order to use it. So what this is doing is referring to that instance. Consequently, if we create many instances of this class, i.e. numerous buttons of this class, each one can be individually identified by this self dot here. This is the next program statement to execute, and it will create an instance of the label class, the label widget, and this instance will be bound to this name. And if we have a look at this name, we can see it's the same as this one, and what we have here is a message to that instance that invokes the grid method, and we can see that the grid method is going to place the label at row 1 column 1, and you can see that that is this label here. Let's now return to this program statement that creates the instance of the label class, the label widget, and let's concentrate on the parameters that were sent. Again, you can see we're sending in self for the same reason we sent in self to the previous 3 creations of widgets. Here you can see we've set the relief equal to solid. Now that will create the label with this look, which has the black lines round the outside, and you can see that the label isn't very big, and that's because there's no text in it yet. Let's now consider this parameter, and you can see we have text variable has been assigned this, and if you have a look at what this is, we've shown this in the schematic diagram as here, and that's where we created the string variable on this line here. So this label will be tied to this string that was created on this line. If I arrange for my code to set this to a value, such as hello Philip Jones, then what will appear within this label is hello Philip Jones. So we don't have to send information directly to this label, we send it to this variable here, this string variable, and it'll automatically be transferred to this label because of this parameter here. So when this line of code executes, we know that it'll be responsible for causing this initialization to execute, and we will have this slot producing the widgets we want, and this will position the widgets. Now I'd wish to stress here that the widgets are positioned on the frame, and what you are seeing here are the position of all of those widgets. Here you've got the label, the entry, the button, and another label. This frame at the moment is not on the window. When this program statement finishes, which means that this will execute and finish, this slot is not on the window. What we have to do is realize that the frame, which is what you're looking at here, will be somewhere in the execution space, somewhere in the computer's memory. We now have to transfer that frame to the window, and that's what this line does. You can see here is invoking the grid method and positioning the frame at row 0, column 0, and of course this frame is at row 0, column 0 of the window. So this creates the frame, this positions the frame. Of course, when this created the frame, all this code executed, which resulted in the production of these two variables. It produced these widgets and it positioned these widgets, but it did so on the instance of this class, the hello name frame class, and that instance is a frame, and it is a frame because it is inherited from the frame class, where the frame class is the superclass and this is the subclass. So this class that I was responsible for producing was able to position labels, buttons, etc. onto an instance of itself because it inherited from the frame class and took on the cloak, if you like, of the frame class. Everything you can do to the frame class, you can do to the hello name frame class. So the ability to create a label and position it onto an instance of this class is exactly the same as to when you simply use the frame class directly. A question you may be asking yourself at this point is, why should I bother producing my own class, hello name frame, that inherits from frame? Why not directly use the frame class? Why not directly create an instance of the frame and add the buttons to that instance? Well, the reason is, if you have a look at the frame here as it appears within the window, you can see you have a couple of labels, a button, and an entry widget. And if you ever needed this arrangement again, you simply create an instance of the hello name frame class. Now, if we consider the runtime for this program, and you have a look here, I'm going to enter my name, and there you can see Philip Jones entering, and as I do, you can see it automatically appears up here. If I now click on this button, then this method will execute because we've tied this button to this method because of the setting of this parameter here when we created the instance of the button. So this program statement within the method will now execute, and if we look at this first, you can see here that this is self.users_name, which is referring to this variable here, and if you come down you can see we're using the get method, and what that will do, it'll get what's stored in this variable, which is Philip Jones, and Philip Jones will be brought to this position. And you can see we concatenate that with this string hello. So within the brackets here we have hello Philip Jones. Now if you look at this, you can see that it's referring to this variable here, and if you come down you can see we're going to set that variable, and what we're going to set it to is what's in these brackets, and we've just said that what we have in these brackets is hello Philip Jones. So what you will see appearing in here is hello Philip Jones. Now this label was created on this line, and you can see here we set the text variable equal to this, so we can say that this is related, is tied to this label. So whatever appears here when we set it will also appear here when we click on the button. Before I finish this video, I want to make sure we're all clear on why we have to use self in so many places. Now, I recommend you look elsewhere on my channel where I've covered self in some detail when I was talking about object-oriented programming in Python. But if we consider this class as something that is capable of having many instances of it created, in other words, you can think of it as a factory for the creation of objects. Each of those objects that are created will have their own ID. So we have to ensure that each one of those separate objects is able to identify itself. And it identifies itself through this name self, which is given the ID. So here, for example, you can see a label has been created, and I give it this name friendly_label, and the word self appears in front of it because this label will belong to a specific instance that has this ID. And if you have a look all down here, you can see that self is appearing in front of all of the widget. And down here, of course, when I decide to position those widgets, I have to put the word self in front of them to identify the label that belongs to that specific instance. If you have a look at this method, you can see in brackets that I'm passing in self. Now that's telling this method, look, you are a method that's been defined in a class, but when an instance of that class is created, ID an object, you belong to that object. So if you have 10 objects, this method will effectively know to which object it belongs. So when we come here now and we get at what's stored in this variable, we have to put the word self in front of it, so we get at the specific variable that belongs to the instance that the code is running on. Check out the supporting website for these videos. In addition, why not follow me on Twitter, as I issue a tweet every time I upload a new video.